We are starting the second session for the afternoon with Professor Reto Auer, who will talk about a very interesting Swiss study.
So thanks a lot for being invited here in this terrific audience, and also next to such wonderful scientists with so much experience. I feel really the comment on dit le maillon faible, and that's good because basically in my life I always trying to be the dumbest person in the room, and I think today I managed it again to make it, and also because you guys are the expert in vaping, and I'm a primary care physician. So primary care physicians are used to not knowing everything, the specialists know much more, and I feel very well in this. And unfortunately, Aurélie Berthet and Nicolas Sambaggio had to leave, but these are the toxicologists of the team, and these toxicologists are extremely important to inform and to do the study. So it's about the efficacy, safety, and toxicology of electronic nicotine delivery system as an aid for smoking cessation. And I know you guys from the vaping community will say, oh, no, don't speak about smoking cessation, speak about switching, speak about, because this, but that's basically how we work as physicians, and all these trials is we set a target quit date for stopping, and then people then switch from vaporizers to or to control. So why are we here? You know, because we're independently funded, and this is Vapecon 2018. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to meet you as the vaping community, just because we meet it during our clinical practice. I'm a primary care physician in Bern, and we're working with other colleagues in Lausanne who are also helping tobaccos quit, and some use vaporizers, and so that's where we had our experience in it. But we also had formal contacts with Helvetic Vape, because as I said, we don't know exactly how to use these vaporizers, and the experience from the community is extremely important to design the trial. So we contacted Helvetic Vape for one reason also, because it is independent from industry. And that's the same for us too. We don't accept money from the tobacco, from the vaping, and from the pharmaceutical industry for this trial. And that's also the case of Helvetic Vape, and that's one of the reasons why we opened this discussion. And they helped us really for counseling on the intervention, how we will do that, also from the choice of the e-liquids, of the choice of the device. And now we're working on the questionnaires and how we assess this, and we hopefully can continue to collaborate with them during the trial, and also for disseminating the results. So why we need randomized trials? You know, it's complex to run a randomized controlled trials, and what it is, as you know, you've been, there are observational studies which are useful, but you know the case of tobacco, caffeine, and heart attacks. If you look at the association between caffeine and heart attacks, it leads you to heart attacks. The problem is you haven't taken into account smoking, because people who smoke cigarettes use more coffee. So if you're not careful, if you not measure everything when you do an observational study, you might lead to the wrong results. So just observational studies are useful, but the way you interpret them can be open to confounding or to biases. And in vaping, you know the many studies that show that people who try with vaping then do not stop smoking, and all these studies that get the right answer based on the data they have. And we know we need a stronger method to look at causal interpretation. So association is not causation. And so why you need a randomized trial, and what is randomized? So you take a group and you allocate one group to an intervention and the other group to another, to a control. And you do this randomly. So all the factors, even those that you do not measure, are taken into account just by the fact that it's random. And with this, you can really look at causal interpretation. It's because of the vaporizers that smokers quit or they expose themselves to less harmful components. So that's just a word about the randomized trial. So I'll go very quickly on this. We know we have promising evidence, and one of the promising evidence has been generated by Riccardo Polosa here in Italy. It looks promising, but we have little data. There are large ongoing trials, and we are also looking at smoking cessation, so tobacco smoking cessation in our trial. We need more data. I don't think this is the strength of our study, but it's certainly the way we powered the analysis. So we looked how many individuals we have to include so that we can show a significant effect. And the other, is it safe? Well, I don't need again to run the presentation Riccardo Polosa did right before, but observational studies suggest them as safe and associated with the health outcomes. But again, association is not causation. And we have not enough evidence from randomized trials to draw a meaningful conclusion. You would not like to take a drug, a medication, just based on 1,000 individuals. You would like to have 10,000, 100,000. In primary care, we say, use a drug quickly so that before it shows it doesn't work or it's harmful. So we need a couple of years until it's better, and I think these, what we think is we absolutely need to pool the results of the study. So we will also generate data on safety and health outcomes, but also we have an open data policy, which is really important for other scientists to use our data and for the public to use the data so that they can better inform the public about the health effects and risks of vaporizers. And exposure to inhaled intoxicants. And I think this is a very original aspect of our study is, you know, even if we don't find a health effect or adverse events, Konstantinos showed us that you need to be careful with these and measure them precisely, because later on you can have the cancer or the heart attack. So, for example, cancer, it will be in 10 years, 15 years, that if you're exposed to these compounds, that you will have it. And we don't have these data, so it will give indirect evidence of the risk-benefit ratio. And studies in controlled setting found association that it looks good, but we absolutely need evidence in real life. What happens if you give vaporizers to 600 participants and they use it differently? That was intended. What is the exposure in the urine of this when they use it in real life? And to our knowledge, no randomized trial that has assessed efficacy also assessed toxicology. And that's because also I come from the medical field. And as you know, physicians in Switzerland are still a bit reluctant, saying, well, even if it works for smoking cessation, you still have these toxic compounds. And we said, well, let's look at it. Let's look if they stop smoking, and also at the same time, well, what is the amount of toxicants in the urine you can find afterwards? And you know, when you take into account vaporizers, but also air pollution, can you differentiate somebody that stops smoking with the vaporizers that sometimes who stops smoking without the vaporizer? Maybe you cannot distinguish this, and the studies Konstantinos showed us before from Lion Sahab suggested this, but this again was an observational study. We will be here in a controlled setting, in a randomized controlled trial, so hopefully if we can show this, this was really make a blow to detractors of vaporizers that it is dangerous or expose you to toxic chemicals. So we're an independent trial with no financial conflicts of interest. This is funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. We're extremely happy that they recognize the importance of this project. So the Swiss National Science Foundation is the major institution for funding research, and it's publicly funded. And this is an investigator-initiated clinical trials, and it's a new scheme at the SNF, Swiss National Science Foundation, that typically funds to investigate a topic not of interest to the industry. And you know the problem of vaporizers is that because it's in the public domain, the vaporizers and the e-liquids, if I am a company who wants to spend millions to do such a study, then my the concurrents can use these results to promote their studies. And that's the reason why the industry has not conducted this research. And so the Swiss National Science Foundation recognized that this is absolutely needed for the public to do a carefully designed studies as we will do for our pharmaceutical drug. We have to understand that the budget is still 10-fold lower than the budget usually for a pharmaceutical product, but still, I think we will do everything possible to conduct the trial. And the last element is, this is an open data study. So data available to all, what does it mean? That when we publish results, the SNF requires us to publish these in journals that will accept that the article is directly, fully accessible, free of charge to the public and the scientific community. And the other is a data sharing. Once the results are published, we will put them in a repository so that the public can verify the results if we interpreted this correctly, and also other scientists can use this data to pool the results, and we're in contact with different scientists around the world so that we can then be sure we can pool all the results from these different studies to better inform the public. So who will participate? So basically, in our studies we conducted in Lausanne and Geneva, we had persons that were smokers around 40 and 50 years old, already with some diseases. And so these are kind of our target population. Those who accept to make they have to be more than 19 years old, smoke more than 5 tobacco cigarettes for the last year, and to be ready to make a serious quit attempt. This is important. You guys maybe did not plan your stop. Maybe you just said, well, why do I not just try one of these vaporizers? This is another population. That's okay. It's just another thing. It's people who are ready to go to healthcare professionals and say, yeah, at that date, I want to stop using cigarettes. And that's the person we're looking for. We'll exclude pregnant and planning to be pregnant women, not because there's some major risk we're expecting, but I think there needs to be dedicated trial in this population, which will hopefully come later. And then it's better if you haven't used ANDS regularly or nicotine replacement therapy or other smoking cessation in the last 3 months, and you need to understand what we're talking about. We will provide all the information in French and German. English will maybe it be possible, but you have all the information material is in French or German. And you have to be able to answer by phone. Or unable to attend a follow-up visit 6 months later. And that's a critical point that will come later. So now the nerdy part. You guys are experts in this. We will use a 3rd generation mouth-to-lung device with a 0.8 ohm coil fixed at 18 watts. It's a fixed airflow. And 50 mAh battery with a 2 milliliter tank. We want to restrict the choice just because these are smokers who don't want to play too much. They are allowed to change the device afterwards. But just for the entry device, we had to make it simple. And for the e-liquids, variety is the spice of life. And this is really what we learned with Helvetic Vap is you need to give the choice of liquids. And so they will have the choice of 90.6, 11 or 6 milligram of nicotine. Also the choice of 2 tobacco flavors, 1 mint, 2 fruity flavors. Also 3 colors of the device if you want. We don't have a choice of another device that would make everything way more complex. It's already a lot. And so vapors could then switch with nicotine concentration and the flavors. And vapors do change and go more to fruity flavors later on. The packaging would be TBD compliant, child proofed, and so the device and the e-liquids, we tested them we conducting the test in our lab to be sure what we're giving to the participants. And then participants in the intervention will receive the ends and e-liquids for free, and in the usual care group, they will have, and also the intervention would be cognitive-based therapy. So the guys in the intervention will also receive usual care, and the person in usual care will only receive usual care. And cognitive behavioral therapy and motivation interviewing. So motivation interviewing is a really important part. It's a goal-oriented, so it's to stop smoking, but it's patient-centered and empathic. And I really like this sentence. It's hate the smoke, love the smokers. And that's basically the way we approach smokers in the medical care. You have good reasons to smoke cigarettes. So now maybe you're vaping, but before you had good reasons to smoke. And we're not here to judge you. And in this trial, we're not here to judge participants. We're here to be a safe place where they can explore the ambivalence. And it's really this empathic approach where the nurses will be trained. And it's also respect of autonomy. And unsolicited advice are the spam of life. You remember the last time your mother told you something, how you reacted? We don't want to be your mother. We're trying to respect your autonomy, and if you're in. And the both group will be allowed to use nicotine replacement therapy. As you know, they are really expensive in Switzerland. We don't have the money to provide them, and that's also in the intervention group. The hardcore smokers, maybe they will need a patch more and cannot have enough nicotine just with the vaporizers. So the design is a randomized trial. So after the screening, you're randomized as 1-to-1, or you get the intervention, so the ends for free and the smoking cessation counseling, or the control group where you just get the smoking cessation counseling. And the primary efficacy measure, as I told you, is the continuous smoking abstinence between target quit dates and follow-up visit. It's really hard, but that's the way these smoking cessation studies are conducted. And it's based on self-report and validated by the inhaled carbon monoxide, cotinine, anabazine, and anals. And that's also to differentiate if your nicotine comes from the vaporizers, the NRTs, or the tobacco cigarettes. You can differentiate this with anabazine and anals. These come only from tobacco cigarettes. So we will know if you smoke or not, if what you report is consistent with what we find in the urine. So, and then secondary measures, 7-day point prevalence, that's if you smoked in the last 7 days at a 6-month visit, and the self-reported reduction in number of cigarettes smoked per day. And then we measure safety and health effects, adverse events and serious adverse events. So Riccardo Polosa has showed us you need millions of people to show adverse events, and we hope we'll contribute to this data by giving a couple of more persons that will have been followed so that you can pull the results later on. For the questionnaires, the self-reported health quality in life, respiratory symptoms, depression, anxiety, and sleep. And we have also objective measures like blood pressure, heart rate, weight, height, abdominal circumference, and blood lipids. And then we have this toxicological part. Because even if we show that everything looks good, maybe you expose yourself to higher concentration of chemicals in the urine. So we will measure volatile organic compounds. These are the formaldehydes Konstantinos talked before. These can come from the vaporizer, especially if you don't use it rightly and you don't change your coils. And the PAH, so the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and the tobacco-specific triazamides, these come from tobacco. So it's really to differentiate and say, look, the tobaccos who continued to smoke, they have these high levels of these compounds. Do the persons that now use only vaporizers have lower exposure to these compounds and also lower VOCs? And as you know, vapors are still exposed a lot to the smoke of tobacco. So maybe we will find some from the others, but I think it's really interesting to compare these different exposures over time. And then we'll measure oxidative stress in urine and exhaled breath. Oxidative stress is an interesting point, is even if we don't measure the one compound that is dangerous, it still has an effect on the body that you can measure on oxidative stress, you know? And so it's kind of the integral of all your exposure to toxins that is measured through these way. So it's sometimes perceived as also a health outcomes, even if it's not a clinically relevant health outcome, but that will also give more power if we find less volatile organic compounds and oxidative stress, a good, and we cannot differentiate this from those who completely stopped smoking or vaping, that will give some arguments to support vaporizers as an aid for smoking cessation. So how it works, so if you're interested in participating, you call. It lasts 15 minutes, a call where we look if you have the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then you set a target quit date. When do you want to stop smoking? Next 3 months. And then 1 week before that, you come, we examine you, it lasts 1.5 hours, we allocate you in your group, and then we get the consultation and we explain you how the device works. And then at a target quit date, we call you. It's a nurse that will call you to help you with dealing with technical issues with the device, or just pushing you to really stop using cigarettes. And then at week 1, week 2, week 4, week 8. And then at 6 months, you come back and we measure all these outcomes. The 6-month visit is really important. If you lose people during the trial, you're basically doing an observational study. Because what happens if all those who are in the control group and who smoke don't come back? Then you'll say, well, vaporizers are cool, right? They help people. No, vaporizers are not good, because all the smokers in the control group are not there, and so it looks like the vaporizers doesn't work. And what happens if all the smokers at 6 months in the vaporizer group don't show up? You will say, well, vaporizers look pretty good because they don't smoke anymore. So if people want to participate, and if you have persons participate, we will be bullish about knowing absolutely if at 6 months you smoke or not. If you cannot smoke on visit, we call you, we ask 2 names of persons of your friends. We ask to have the name of your primary care physician. We ask you email, you ask your phone. We want to know, right? You can stop participating if you want, for sure. This is an ethical principle for sure. But basically, if you're not ready to come back at 6 months, don't come. Because we want 95% of follow-up, and we had that in the past, without still respecting patient autonomy, that they don't want to participate anymore, but still, it doesn't go on judging you. It just goes on informing the international community on what is the effect of vaporizers, and we need to have everybody. If not, we cannot do that, okay? So it starts in June. Can you realize that? I still don't know if we can. It looks good, but you know Murphy's Law is pretty bad these days, so maybe it will be July. And then in August 2018 in Lausanne and Geneva. We start in Bern, just like a pilot. It's a very complex study, and then until we're ready, we want to take 2-3 months before we go to Lausanne and Geneva. If you're interested or have questions, you can shoot an email to the wonderful Anna Schöni, who is the postdoc working with me on this, and or to me, if you're interested. And I want to thank the whole group, so at the University of Bern, University of Lausanne, where we have people from the Polyclinique Médicale Universitaire and the Institute of Work and Health, University of Geneva, and our scientific advisors. So Jean-François Etter is in the board, Yvon Berlin, Konstantinos Farsalinos. We had a wonderful discussion before with Riccardo Polosa, and the funding is from the Swiss National Science Foundation. So thanks a lot.
Merci beaucoup, Reto. I should talk in English. Thank you very much, Reto. So now we can start to have some questions. We didn't have time during the first session for the questions, so if somebody have a question for Konstantinos Farsalinos, Riccardo Polosa, or Reto Auer, please ask your question. Okay. So Yeah, un micro. So thank you, Mark.
We met before, but I have one question. We had a really intense discussion, Reto, with you, and we intensified also on the wording in regard how to name the personal vaporizers. And you really did it good in your talk, always talking about the vaporizers. And I want to ask Konstantinos and Riccardo, in regard on your studies, do you see a way in getting rid of the word e-cigarette in the scientific community? Because I think that's also an issue with the categorization of the vapor products getting linked to the cigarettes. That's my question.
So we want to...
That's an interesting question, but we have to face the reality. Reality is that the e-cigarettes are going to stay in terms of semantics. Actually, I saw an attempt to label cigarettes as ENDS. You're doing, again, I understand why, as electronic nickel delivery device, which was initially very much taken up by the scientific community, but now I see even more and more the repeats of e-cigarettes as terminology for these devices. So I understand there'll be difficulties in associating e-cigarettes to the old conventional tobacco cigarettes, but the reality is that this name is going to stay, and we cannot do anything to reverse the trend, at least for the next few years. I cannot see any you see, the term e-cigarettes is good and bad. It's good that it's called e-cigarettes because many smokers relate to the product quite immediately. The bad, you just mentioned the bad. I really think that we shouldn't be very much worried about that. We just really need to construct good scientific paradigm and try to demonstrate that an electronic cigarette is something very different from a tobacco cigarette, regardless of the wording.
I fully agree with Riccardo. I think it's going to be impossible. It's already been there as a term for many, many years. I also agree with him that you are overly concerned for no real reason. And I agree with Reto on what he said about smoking cessation. When you switch from smoking to e-cigarette use, you have quit smoking. So you shouldn't be annoyed by the term smoking cessation. I understand it. I've received also these kind of comments from vapers that we don't quit, we switch. Yeah, if you have stopped using tobacco cigarettes, you have quit smoking. You haven't quit any kind of use of any inhalation product. You haven't quit nicotine use, but you have quit smoking. By definition. So, interestingly, in a study where I'm comparing a heated tobacco product, IQOS, with an e-cigarette, one of the comments of a reviewer was that he wanted me to comment in the study that it's the IQOS that should be called an e-cigarette because it is much more like a cigarette with some electronics and not what we call electronic cigarettes. He also said that we should call them personal vaporizers. Well, technically I agree with him and with you, but we use this term for 10 years now. And I think it's already too late. I think this is not working, it's out of battery. I think it's too late. It's too late for a change in terminology. I think there is no battery. Okay. Okay. I finished. So you can. It seems to work. I'm finished. Just keep it.
Sorry, I forgot. You finished?
Okay, so thank you. Oh. Is there another question from the audience? Yeah?
only a compliment. In French, it's very different because we have the chains that we call it vaporette, odeur, vapotage, and it's very different with my because I work in an addiction camp, and in German we try to talk about the same thing, but we see that it's not possible. It's E-Zigaretten und vapotage in French, but we try in Romandie, in the French part of Switzerland. It's very ambitious, but to make the most that the next law of tobacco products will call E-Zigaretten vapotage of French. I spoke both English and German. I hope that it's comprehensible. That,
yes, thank you. Yeah, it's the same in German. You can say E-Zigaretten or E-Dampfen. So, yeah.
Ja, aber E-Zigaretten sind meistens benutzt.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think it's our role as scientists when we publish a paper to use the term "we believe more." So that's the first thing. So that's our attitude, and you will see in the information to participants that it's written e-cigarette, and the reason is the ethics committee asked us to change from vaporizers to e-cigarettes. So you have some constraints when you do studies, that you have guys who decide this, who have no clue, but they decide for you. And so we say, okay, we'll write e-cigarette, and then under brackets we say vaporizer for Dampfer in German, or then vaporette in on the clamor. So don't be surprised if you feel I spoiled you for that. I completely understand your point, and we do whatever is possible.
Thank you. As an association, we are never using e-cigarette. Since 4 years, we are talking about vaping products. So it's possible to do it. And if nobody tries to change that, it will never change, and it will stay a long time. So I think it may seem to be something not that important, but it's very important, because if people cannot understand that it's totally different than a cigarette, it's more difficult to clearly understand the product, I think.
Your point is very well taken, particularly now that we have emergence of new electronic products that produce inhalational experience close to smoking. I think the term vaping product is the one that I'm using most right now in my scientific communication, because e-cigarettes, if you think of e-cigarettes, is a term that was made by users when there were only cigalikes around mostly. And that's the reason why it was communicated as cigarettes. But now you do have more advanced designs with the e-liquids, and they are all a part of science that deals with designs which are electronics and designs which have to do with flavorings and stuff. So bringing the two together, the term vaping products is very omnicomprehensive, and I think we should start communicating this in your environment as well as in our academic environment. I think this, starting now, maybe will make progress in 5-10 years. And to make a change, it will take some time, but this doesn't really mean that we should not even try. We're trying. It's not that we're not trying. I just want to compliment personally with Reto and his attempt to launch a very important study in this country. I'm very grateful that he's going to do randomized controlled trials in Switzerland. And I really hope that you personally will try to convince your friends who are smokers to take part in this study. Because I think it will be very important for researchers like us to see the support from the participants. We see that the recruitment is low. We start to lose also our sense of of engagement with the protocol itself. So it's very important to be united and to bring help to Reto and his research staff as much as you can. I'm sure the Helvetic Association will do its utmost, although I understand you're already vaping, so you're not eligible for the study, but I'm sure you have lots of friends who are not vaping and still smokers.
So yes, of course, Helvetic Vape will do its best to provide as much people as possible. Of course, we can provide easily some vapors for the initial part of the study, and then, of course, vapors can convince some smokers to participate.
Well, thanks a lot for this terrific support, and coming from you, it's a huge honor to receive such an endorsement. We had this discussion about with you before. We were open to these collaboration without making it more formal. I think we have to see how recruitment works. I'm pretty confident it will work well, because there are so many people who are desperate of trying to stop, and Switzerland has really suffered a lot from this ban on sale of nicotine-containing e-liquids, which has really made that so many people are ready to try, and even if it's something that has been independently tested in a lab, I have no doubt it will work fine. So thanks a lot. And I think the other reason why we wanted to have contacts with Helvetic Vape is really we wanted to have this discussion, because we have some constraints because it's a randomized trial. As I told you, we have some constraints, some legal constraints, some other things, and there are so many things we would like to do, right? To bring in the whole vaping community, to send you the participant, but then it will flow the randomization process, right? And so it was really important to have the discussion. So if you feel we're completely out of the box, or if you feel we're doing really something to show that vaping does not work, it's certainly not our intention. So please come to us, or come to Helvetic Vape and have the discussion, and so that we can be constructive on this and try to make the best study within the constraints. All right.
Thank you, Reto. Is there more questions? Yes, Philippe?
Yeah, a question more technical maybe. I try salt nicotine at 40-50 milligrams, and I consume much less liquid than with base nicotine. And yeah, it looked like interesting to consume less and maybe to help some smokers to quit smoking. But as a basic user without some chemist background, I don't know really what we know about salt nicotine. Do you?
This is a very interesting question, because it's something that I try to convince vapers for a long time. Over the last few years, we are seeing a transition in the use of much lower nicotine liquids. So people are trying to reduce the nicotine concentration in the liquids they use. However, this is accompanied by a misconception that by using lower nicotine liquids, they reduce their nicotine intake, the total amount of nicotine they obtain per day, which in the vast majority of cases is not happening. Jean-François Etter published a study evaluating cotinine levels, which is a measure of total daily nicotine intake, in vapers over a period of 2 years. So over these 2 years, all vapers switched to lower nicotine liquids, but they had exactly the same amount of nicotine intake because they were just consuming more liquid per day. In fact, consuming more liquid per day is much worse than using high nicotine liquids and lowering your liquid consumption, because all the toxins that are released in e-cigarette vapor are directly related, they are linearly associated with the amount of liquid you consume. The more the amount of liquid, the more the amount of exposure to any toxins. So someone who is consuming 10 milliliters of liquid per day is being exposed to twice the amount of formaldehyde than someone consuming 5 milliliters per day. Nicotine levels play no role at all in the level of exposure to harmful chemicals. So the best thing that you can do is consume as low amounts of liquid as possible, and the best way to achieve that is to increase the concentration of nicotine in your liquids. Even those who have now switched to something like 3 or 6 milligrams, if they go up to 12 or 18, they will see that without any effort at all, they will lower their nicotine, their liquid consumption substantially, simply because the brain of every smoker and every vapor is programmed to obtain a specific amount of nicotine. So you will not be able to trick your brain when you increase the nicotine concentration. You will still need the same amount of nicotine, but you will get it by consuming less liquid. That's very, very important for vapors to understand. Of course, they are free to do whatever they want, but if you are asking about the best option, consume as low liquid levels as you can, liquid amount, with as much nicotine content as possible.
Thank you.
If I may.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Go.
We discussed this topic with Konstantino for more than a couple of years now, and in general, I agree very much. But there is another trajectory. The device and the design of many devices are improving so much that many people are not even willingly trying to reduce the nicotine concentration, the liquid they buy. But they basically force to buy lower levels of nicotine concentration in liquid because of the higher performance of the new devices. So this story that we have created, because it's only us talking about this, maybe is evolving also to include those new vapors who've been now buying the new generation device design, and they are obviously forced to use lower concentration, exposing them to higher amount of even unknown toxicants, because he's talking about aldehydes, something that we know, but there may be unknown toxicants that we haven't even measured today that can be doubled or tripled depending on the amount of liquid consumed per day.
Riccardo is talking about mouth to lung versus direct lung inhalation, the two patterns of e-cigarette use, and the development of those new devices that allow users to inhale directly to the lung. My personal opinion, and again, you are adults, you make the choice yourself. If you ask me my opinion, I'm totally against the use of direct lung inhalation for a simple reason. It forces you to consume huge amounts of liquid. Most of the direct lung inhalation users are using more than 10 milliliters per day. Few years ago, it was extremely rare to find any vapor use 10 milliliters per day, and it's almost impossible to do that with mouth to lung. I understand that some people like it a lot, but if you ask from a safety standpoint, it's not at all a good idea. Ideally, yes, use direct lung, but consume 4 milliliters per day. Well, usually you can't do that. In that aspect, however, nicotine salts can help, because the difference with nicotine salts is that you don't have the throat irritation of the very high nicotine concentration. So you can basically do direct lung inhalation with an 18 milligram liquid, 18 milligrams of nicotine with nicotine salts. But just be careful that after 3 or 4 puffs, you might faint from nicotine overdose. But this will again force you to consume much lower amounts of liquid while you are still using direct lung inhalation.
Thank you. Is there another question in the audience? Yes, Celestine?
Bon, cette fois en français. C'est pour Monsieur Auer, l'enquête qui commencera donc au mois de juin. Comment vous allez recruter les personnes, enfin par l'aide que vous recevrez d'autres associations? Est-ce que vous allez par exemple les payer, leur fournir les ustensiles? Comment est-ce que vous allez voilà, leur faire envie en fait de participer à cette étude, parce qu'ils ne pourront pas non plus faire n'importe quoi. Donc, voilà.
Exactly. So,
So
she's just asking.
Maybe translating the question. The question is about the condition for the study. How people will be recruited, what material they will receive, and something like that.
Or are they gonna
So
paid?
what
Yeah.
do they gain from participating? Do you hear me now? It feels slow. Yeah, I try here now.
Yes,
It's better.
yes.
Good. So yeah, thanks for this question. I think it's a very important one. So our main way to recruit in the past was to make advertisement in the press. So we announced it, and we will have a round of announcements in the official press, in the local journal, saying there's a study at the University of Bern or Lausanne or Geneva who wants to find smokers who are interested in quitting, and which will then receive for free vaporizer. So the exact term has been sent to the ethics committee, so we'll have to check if this is exactly the way we will announce this. But that's one of the way we will recruit participants. So participants will receive, in the past we never paid participants, and you're not supposed to do that in randomized trial. So what we will provide them with free vaporizers, free e-liquids for 6 months. And then the smoking cessation counseling. So this is also a medical intervention they will receive for free and support over the phone. The control group is kind of the sad one, right? The people will come, they want a vaporizer, and they will not receive one. And so what they will receive is at 6 months, they will receive a 30 Swiss francs voucher to compensate for the cost of the liquid.
Your question is of enormous importance, not only for keeping the attrition rate low in this kind of study, to reduce the attrition rate in this study, but also because it is important to have two very good comparator groups. And now that you're raising the point, I see a little problem there. You are heavily incentivizing a group, providing 6 months of a free product. You know, these are people willing to quit smoking. So they say, hey, I have a good, we are trying to help you, and we will provide you the product to help you quit smoking. And another group where you're just giving counseling, let's face it, it's words from people, and the possibility of having a first try with NRT. I think in order to equalize the two groups, you need to offer vouchers after the first week or whatever you are going to design, and then vouchers for e-liquids as well. Because if you provide the products throughout the study, you're imbalancing enormously with different level of motivation, group A versus group B, which is good if you want to show that electronic cigarette is gonna be successful. But you'll be criticized then by tobacco control experts. Thank you. Important. You know, every time I ask myself, what am I going to offer to somebody coming to the clinic and quitting smoking? First off, they should be motivated, as they are interested to quit. So their immediate motivation is to come to the clinic and expect something in return. And that's perfectly fine, all right? And in fact, the idea of giving money is something that I do not like entirely, because this is another not naturalistic incentivator, okay, which you shouldn't be using. That's the reason why all these studies with drugs have a very high quit rates, also in the placebo arms, because they get paid. All the studies from the US, all the people in the placebo arms get paid for their visits, their inconvenience of the time. So it's very important that perhaps in the initial stage of your pilot study, you just have a good look at that, and we thank you very much for allowing us to refine the protocol on a very key important point.
I have an additional comment on that. Reto said, and he was very correct, that he needs to have people motivated to come back, because the more you lose at follow-up, the more the length and the duration of the study, the more resources are wasted because you have already spent time on these people and they are not completing the protocol. So, since you as vapers are going to participate in the recruitment by suggesting to your friends to come to the study, it is important not to create false expectations. You need to understand that all participants are going to be randomly assigned to the groups. So when you tell everyone that you're going to go there and participate in a study where you will be giving an e-cigarette, you must know that there's a 50% chance that this person is going to be randomized to the control group, not getting an e-cigarette. So you need to be very careful when you participate into this recruitment process, and explain to everyone that the correct way to do the study is randomize everyone, and randomizing everyone means that there is a 50% chance you will not get any cigarette. So it needs a very careful approach to potential participants. Otherwise, Reto is going to waste huge amount of time and resources for people that will not come back and complete the whole research protocol.
Well, yeah, first of all, the control group, this is what we do now, right? If somebody comes to my clinic in primary care and wants to quit smoking, I'll counsel this person, and it costs this person something for my time, and then they have to buy the nicotine replacement therapy. So this is not nothing. That's the first thing. They still receive something. And on the criticism point from the community, well, we accept this. I mean, our strength, again, is also in the toxicological part. Yeah, so we'll see. We always have to be extremely humble with this. And I think we don't have to underappreciate the willingness for participants to contribute to science. I mean, if you want to pay them even something, it kind of destroys the intrinsic motivation, right? I'm not doing that for money. I'm doing this because I want to contribute to the knowledge, and this is international knowledge funded by public funding. So we experience extremely good relationship with our participants. We respect them a lot, and even if I was really strong on the 6-month visit, I mean, we're not like that in reality. It was just for you to understand a little bit the concept. So I think it goes through respect and you know, in the past we had very high follow-up rates, even with intervention where the people did not get what they wanted to.
So thank you very much. We are at the end of this session.